In October 2025, Amazon announced 14,000 corporate layoffs. Corporate isn't retail, it isn't warehouse workers. They'd been hit hard before. Corporate includes marketing and finance, but it's also technical staff. This video is about the impact on tech, software engineers, data scientists, tech managers, and other IT roles. I'll give you the breakdown, and I'll get into the reasons behind these layoffs. And then I'll hand over to the career coach in this channel. Kyle will give practical advice on managing careers amidst this chaos. But you need to understand the landscape in order to navigate through it. So here's the summary of the engineering purge of 2025. As I said, corporate covers many roles, and Amazon didn't give a breakdown as part of their announcement. But the US has a federal law that kicks in with mass layoffs. This is WARN, that's Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification. WARN. Employers have to file documents with the state that, crucially for us, include the job titles and the number of people in specific roles. These are public documents. So let's take a look at some key numbers. Tech roles in Amazon are across the country, but there are 4 major hubs. Amazon's home state is Washington, but they have a lot of tech workers in California, New York, and New Jersey. There were 4,700 corporate positions cut across those 4 hubs. Of those, 1,800 were engineering roles. That's nearly 40%. Now let's drill down to Washington State. 600 software engineers were let go. Interested in seeing what a WARN filing looks like? It might make you queasy, but here goes. To notify you that Amazon is separating employees at the below facilities. Yeah, separating. Now let's take a look at the levels of software engineers that were let go. At Amazon, a mid-level engineer is referred to as an SDE2, Software Development Engineer 2. That was the largest group among the engineering layoffs. But senior engineers and tech managers were also hit. If you take a look at LinkedIn, that's clear. There was a principal engineer with 9 years at Amazon, a senior program manager with 7 years. In fact, product and program managers accounted for 10% of the WARN filings. And let's do a different breakdown, this one by division. AWS and cloud were hit big. I'll speculate that AWS customers are taking a look at their bills and scaling down a little. Alexa and other hardware devices are known to be not particularly profitable for Amazon, and that's being generous. There was a lot of downsizing there. If you're not a gamer, I'm not, then you may be surprised to learn that Amazon has 2 big gaming studios in San Diego and Irvine, California. A lot of layoffs there, but gamer friends tell me that again, these areas weren't doing particularly well revenue-wise. I think the biggest surprise for me is that their advertising division was hit hard in New York. That would include data scientists and data engineers. That division is making money hand over fist, but it took 20% of the total cuts in New York. So that was October with this massive hit, but there were earlier hits this year. Here's a timeline of just 2025. So why did they target engineers and tech? CEO Andy Jassy did have various things to say about this. But before we get into the official positions, it's good to have some context of how Amazon got to this point of mass layoffs of talented tech staff. For Amazon, Meta, and other massive tech companies, we have to go back to COVID. During the pandemic, a lot of the world moved online. Tech companies with a consumer focus had an incredible boom in online activity and in revenue. Amazon had a double boom. Aside from their own retail services, other companies scaled up on AWS cloud. Some commentators said at the time that this growth in online shopping couldn't be a permanently rising curve, but some tech CEOs figured that it would. If you check out my video on Meta's layoffs, I do give props to Mark Zuckerberg for admitting that he got that prediction wrong. I'm not so complimentary on other aspects of how Meta handled their recent layoffs. But what about Amazon? Let's look at their growth during the COVID years. Consumer revenue was insane. It went from $245 billion in 2019 to $434 billion in 2022. And what about headcount? Again, I'm excluding retail and warehouse here, just corporate. Whereas revenue nearly doubled, corporate headcount nearly tripled. It went from 150,000 employees to 415,000. That's phenomenal. But corporate includes legal, HR, etc. So let's look closer. Most of this growth was concentrated in 3 areas. AWS was a massive part, and that's engineers. Advertising grew. That's a lot of data science and data engineering. Finally, Amazon threw a lot of staff at what it calls experimental divisions. This is where revenue isn't predictable. I mean, any revenue, like Alexa and their satellites division. So that's insane growth. But this was at the same time that other corporate giants were also hiring big. And Amazon had a problem back then. Traditionally, they never paid well. I mean, they paid very well when compared to average salaries, but they were well below the Googles and the Metas. In 2022, they doubled their max base pay to continue all this acquisition of talent. So it probably seems like whiplash when you compare 2022 massive hiring to 2025 massive firing. But again, context and recent history matters. Amazon and other companies lost their collective marbles and strategic sense during this hiring boom. Amazon was hiring people to stay ahead of the curve and to hoard talent as protection against their competitors. That was the strategy, but it wasn't aligned with specific business direction. And then the realization of mistakes kicked in at board level. In 2021, Andy Jassy took over from Jeff Bezos as CEO. Now, Jassy has been with Amazon since 1997 when it was a bookseller, so he was one of the decision makers behind the hiring boom. But in 2023, he course corrected. There were two waves of layoffs in 2023 that totaled about 27,000 corporate jobs. The first wave was in January. That was mostly non-tech. A lot of HR staff were let go because of the reduction in recruitment. The second wave was in March, and these were tech roles where the company targeted AWS. There were 8,000 employees laid off in this second wave. Let's move on to 2024. This year didn't see the kind of massive layoff announcements that can spook stock markets. It was more of a drip feed of targeted cuts. I'm going to keep my focus on tech here. The layoffs in January 2024, less tech focused. April targeted AWS, but it was mostly sales and marketing folk. Alexa took another cut in late 2024, but by and large, tech workers were reasonably stable during this year. It was like the calm before the big storm, and what a storm that was. That brings us to 2025, where I started this video. I went back in time to highlight the 3-year hiring boom that subsided in 2022. And now we can talk about the reasons behind the layoffs and what we can expect in 2026. First, let's take a look at the official line from Andy Jassy, CEO. Here's what he said on Amazon's Q3 quarterly earnings call. This was right after the layoffs, and he said, "The announcement that we made a few days ago was not really financially driven, and it's not even really AI driven, not right now at least. It's culture." Culture? No, I don't really know what that means either. Anything and everything. But he is definitely keen to downplay AI as the main driver, and he's saying it's not financial. We have to read his memo to see what he gives as the main reason. He gives the main reason as reducing bureaucracy. Jesse has this thing about Amazon being the world's largest startup. For a company founded in 1994, some might say that's ridiculous. But if we take it seriously, startups are lean, at least the successful ones. And Amazon's hiring spree of software developers also greatly expanded their middle management layer of tech managers. So Jassy is saying why they laid off managers. Reduce bureaucracy, less layers. But as I've shown, more non-management software engineers were cut than managers. So reducing bureaucratic layers isn't the only factor. And despite Jassy now saying that AI isn't the main driver, he had a different story back in the summer. In June 2025, this is what he wrote in an internal memo. He said that AI would lead to fewer people doing jobs. And when Jassy also says that finances aren't the reason, we need to look closer at the finances. Amazon, like other companies, is investing heavily in AI, and for that, it's building AI data centers. The capital expenditure in 2025 was 7 billion over their estimates, coming in at a total of an eye-watering 125 billion. So 7 billion over. Well, cutting 14,000 well-paid corporate roles could save 3 to 4 billion annually. That helps balance the books. So for me, there are three factors. Undoubtedly, the company's overhiring during the pandemic is one. Some of the layoffs are correcting bad strategy. AI must be a second factor. He said it himself, despite roaring back at the actual time of the layoffs. Thirdly, economics. It's not just that Amazon has big AI bills. The US economy has been challenging for consumers, and then companies using AWS are watching their costs. I'm going to say that this is the third factor. So that's the story of the layoffs. But what does it mean for you? Are you still in Amazon thinking about how best to protect yourself? And if you're not in Amazon, are you thinking your company could be planning to follow suit and you need to protect yourself? And then Amazon is still hiring. Are you wondering if it's a good idea to apply? Now I'm going to hand over to the career coach on this channel. That's Kyle. He's going to take a look at this from the lens of managing your own career.
The urgent question for you if you're still working at Amazon is how do you survive? I'll give one large tip here. You have to maximize your utility right now. It means you need to stop focusing on purely technical projects and start focusing on current painful business problems. Every technical idea you propose now has to be filtered through a business lens. So if you're refactoring an old system just because the code is ugly, that's the wrong thing to be working on right now. The priority shifts from minimizing technical debt to just pure future velocity. The next tip is for tech workers and other companies looking at these layoffs with growing concern. Be sure that your career isn't all about pure coding, never designing. If your job is purely to execute designs that are given to you, AI is starting to replace up to 30% of that function. You have to become the person whose designs get executed. The architect, the problem solver. Another tip, now is a good time to think about whether your team is within a cost center or is driving profits. If you're an enterprise dev at a bank, your team is a cost center, but if you can move to a role developing a product or a trading platform, you are directly generating revenue. That completely changes your value to the company.
Thanks, Carl. As I mentioned, the company is still hiring. What about people currently thinking about applying?
If you're looking for stability, it isn't the best choice at the moment.
But some things still haven't changed. The company still has very exciting projects that impact the world, and they still pay very well. So if you think that very few places are career safe in this climate,
In that case, it becomes a reasonable choice. Just bear in mind the tips I started with for people still inside the company, and good luck.